Today we're doing a tutorial on the Staunton Gambit, which begins in the Dutch, and we push e4, gambiting our pawn. This gambit is extremely deadly, extremely easy to play, boasts a very strong win rate at the club level, and at only 4% of games played, I think it's very fair to call this a surprise weapon. And this gambit, of course, is a trick that slides very neatly into the sleeve of d4 players. It's not all good news though, and I definitely don't want to waste your time, so I'll quickly mention what I consider to be the biggest negatives of this opening. Firstly is the big one. White theoretically has an advantage in the Dutch, but in the Staunton Gambit, technically black with perfect play can equalize. Of course, if you're under 2000, you can more or less ignore that. The other issue with the Staunton Gambit is that there's a small percentage of Dutch players that don't start f5. For example, sometimes people will start e6, and the trade-off for allowing the transposition into the French, of course, is if we play c4, they can go into the classical Dutch. You may find yourself getting caught off guard by the 10% or so of players who play the Dutch but use an alternative move order like this. Besides these factors though, the Staunton Gambit is a very good opening, and it's seen plenty of success at every level, even at the grandmaster level, as we can quickly look at. 99% of grandmasters take the pawn, 71% of casual players do. So I'll start by briefly talking about the major sidelines. As I'm sure you can guess, all of these sidelines are completely terrible. We'll start with the most common, d6, probably the best of the three. I'd recommend just taking the pawn. They'll recapture with tempo, and don't deliver the check like these idiots, instead start knight f3. Here you'll notice we've transposed into the Ballo variation of the rat defense. I'm not sure when Hans Niemann got a defense named after him, but that's definitely a huge win for the Americans. I'll play the most common moves for both sides and then talk about some general ideas. First of all, our development plan looks kinda like this. We'll castle short, and we really don't mind trading off the light bishop if it means we get to move our queen forward to the d3 square with tempo. Our opponent's development plan, on the other hand, isn't so obvious. Developing their bishop will take multiple turns, and also requires a weakening and very ugly looking pawn move, and knight c6 can be met by e5. Overall, a very comfortable position for white, and you should be very happy to have this kind of position coming out of the opening. Now that we've covered d6, let's see what happens to the 7% of players who push e6. Once again, we'll start by taking. Almost everyone captures back, the best move. Here, I like the more forcing option, bishop d3, targeting this pawn for capture. From here, just develop the knight, castle short. Your bishop will want to pin the knight, and finally we'll look at knight f6, e5, and their best move is going to be going back to the g8 square. The second most common, knight e4, just straight up loses the knight. Now it's time to move on to the Staunton Gambit accepted. We'll go over the major variations as well as some of the main ideas and themes and traps. I tend to prefer knight c3 over f3, but f3 is a pretty good line. First we'll look at the obvious mistake of d5. We deliver the check, and that is a free pawn. Not bad for 3 moves in. Huge shout out to Line Nc6 for holding this against Bananas 22. And classical too, brutal. Anyways. If your opponent has managed to survive the minefield up until this point, we're ready to move into the main line with knight f6 played by black, and we in turn attack their knight with our bishop with bishop g5. If you've watched my channel much, you may notice that this position has a lot in common with another gambit I've covered, the Von Popiel Gambit and the Black Mar-Diemer. The difference of course being that in the Von Popiel the d-pawn's missing as opposed to the f-pawn in the Staunton. But my point is, since both are gambits that come out of d4 openings, they do pair very well together when you're learning. Food for thought. Returning to the Staunton. As you can see, things are about to get very tricky. We'll start with the most common move with 34% of players playing it. It's d5, and it's a mistake because we can capture. And then, regardless of the way they capture, our move's going to be queen h5 check, getting ready to capture the pawn back. So that's how you beat d5 players, moving on to e6. This is another line which is very similar in character to the Von Popiel Gambit, and also a little bit to the Bern variation of the French. And here I'd strongly recommend playing in the same style as the Bern French by capturing the pawn, adding another attacker to this knight. Almost everyone will defend, 96% of players. And here, still following the Bern plan, we're going to capture, they're going to capture back, and then we're going to reinforce our pawn with c3. What we're left with is a very comfortable attacking position with a very open character, which is nice because our opponent is conspicuously missing their f-pawn. Capturing isn't terrible, but first we should prioritize developing our bishop, developing our knight. Our queen usually wants to come to c2, creating a battery, or sometimes it wants to come to e2. Reinforcing this knight, they do like to fianchetto. I'll go a little bit deeper into theory here since almost everyone castles. Here, these are both perfectly good options. Bishop d3, knight f3, you'll end up playing both of them anyways. What I find myself doing in this position is just going straight for h4 and just going straight for the kingside attack, but I know that's not quite optimal. The final thing I'd like to mention is just that you really can castle either way in this opening. I, like I said earlier, tend to castle queenside and pawn storm since the kingside is missing a pawn, but it's really dealer's choice. Back to the main line starting position of the Staunton Gambit. There's one more line I'd like to cover, Blunder really, h6, before I move on to the three main lines. If they play h6, this should be very, very obvious. You just capture and then deliver the check, and they have to move their king and lose castling rights. Back to our starting position, and one more thing I'd like to point out before we dig into these three lines is just how many people play a very, very inaccurate move up until this point. We're already down to only 43,000 games. And even in this position of the main line, over half of players are making a mistake. This is what makes lines like the Staunton Gambit so powerful, where you just break open the center immediately and just crush your opponent. 18% of players here will choose the main line g6. Their plan is very simple, their plan is to just play the Leningrad Dutch. The most important thing you can remember in this line is to not be tempted by the capture on f6. You'll see most people play it. It's absolutely terrible. Whenever your opponent fianchettos, you really want to keep that same colored bishop, that way you can trade it off later. If you're playing the Staunton Gambit, I assume you want to play a gambit and not just a normal opening where you're slightly worse. Instead, we'll play in the style of a gambit with f3. This is considered the Lasker variation, so you know things are about to be fun. Here, if they capture, we'll recapture with our knight, and we'll have a massive lead in development, and our opponent is still missing one of the pawns in their kingside. Trade their bishop off, h4, h5. And that's the most common move. Before we get to the main line though, if they play anything like bishop g7 that allows us to capture their pawn, we're already winning the game. They're going to be forced to make another unproductive pawn move, and we're going to have an absolutely massive center and a lead in development, which is everything we want. Surely I don't have to cover e3, just capture it. I mean, people play really, really silly moves in this opening, and we're ready to move on to the main line with d5. We're getting a bit into the weeds here, so I'll stop with the theory at this point and talk about some general plans. Queen d2, bishop h6, castle long, h4, h5. If they capture, we'll want to capture back with our knight, and if this pawn ever moves, this will be a very, very nice square for our bishop. The important thing to remember is just attack the kingside really quickly, because they've made all these pawn moves, and we're just way ahead in development. That's g6, the engine's favorite, and a perfectly reasonable move. Moving on, knight c6 may seem bad because we can push d5, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Everyone plays knight e5. And here the move is queen e2, a very natural feeling move, adding more attack to this pawn, preparing to castle long. Their best move here is knight f7, at which point we can capture, they capture back, and we can grab our pawn. Here we clearly have way more initiative. Their f-pawn's gone, they effectively played f6 and just moved their knight around a lot. Finally, we have c6. As you can see, the average rating for c6 is 2095. This is an opening you'll see a lot at the higher levels, because it's actually very venomous. It's preparing for d5. Here, you have to remember to gambit your f-pawn. d5 sticking to their plan. Remember in the Staunton Gambit, when they don't capture our f-pawn, we capture their e-pawn. Most people capture with pawn. And here I'll talk about our development plan. We'll want to develop our bishop to c4. This makes our opponent's development very uncomfortable. Here our plan is nice and simple as always. Just like when they fianchetto, we're going to go queen d2, we're going to castle long, and then we're going to develop our pieces and attack on the king side. Recommend me your favorite opening in the comments. I'm a very small channel, so there's a very high likelihood I cover it. Also, if you want to do me a favor, leave a like for the algorithm.
Chess Gambit explain.